get into it. So I suppose, I was fortunate. I grew up in a house that was just acres and acres of books. But I was never sort of mandated. I never had mum or dad say, you must now read a book. I guess it just sort of happened. Keith Topping is Professor of Educational and Social Research at the University of Dundee. Now, he authors the What Kids Are Reading report. I'm pleased to say he joins me now. Thank you very much for coming on. I must admit, I'd not heard of your research until this week, and I'm grateful for you coming on. How do you react to your findings? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, it's not too serious a decline. We're only looking at a 4% decline in the number of books read. But it is the first time that this has happened in 16 years.
Well, we have a third of students struggling with reading, though, in tandem with that, Professor.
And that as well, yes. Now, that raises issues about what teachers are doing about this. Of course, teachers are under enormous pressure in terms of covering the curriculum, but we also have evidence that the amount of time dedicated to reading in school has declined in the last year. So maybe teachers are under too much pressure. The other issue is, are there students, particularly in secondary school, who are more at risk of reading failure, who are no longer attending school? There's a sort of a post-COVID sequel here that we need to take into account too.
I have a note that you're a former head teacher at a secondary school. How did you encourage and how did your colleagues encourage pupils to read there, Professor?
Well, that's not correct. I'm not
a
former
sorry.
head teacher at a secondary school, but I have spent a lot of time in a great many schools. In primary school, there's a lot of encouragement to read. In secondary school, people kind of assume that students are reading, but actually the amount of time given over to reading in secondary school is quite small.
But they're not, are they? And I'm sorry that I've given you a post you didn't enjoy, but that's clearly not happening. So I wonder, how much is it down to schools and pupils themselves? How much is it down to mum and or dad?
Well, it's probably down to all three of those. I mean, schools need to think about dedicating more time to reading. Pupils need to read more challenging books more carefully. And where they do diverge onto digital literacy, they need to make sure that that digital literacy is giving them sufficient challenge. Parents, we would hope, are discussing books with children and extending them beyond those books. But there's also an issue here for policymakers where, can they encourage schools to devote more time to reading?
OK, finally, as an expert in this field, Professor, for parents who are listening now and they're suddenly thinking, yes, I need to start getting my children into books, what's a good entry-level book or series of books to which you might point them?
Well, it's very difficult to prescribe a book or an entry-level series when children's interests are so diverse. I mean, a lot of parents, particularly mothers, would be very inclined to prescribe fiction, but actually a lot of boys are more interested in non-fiction. However, they don't tend to read non-fiction any better than they read fiction. So there are issues about trying to pursue the interests of the individual child rather than sticking to a prescribed list.
Grateful for your time. Thank you, Keith Topping, Professor of Education.